All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone who is joining us on the Teams call. We're also streaming live to YouTube. In case you're watching out there, feel free, wherever you're at, to drop questions in chat. If you have any questions about anything Office 365 or modernizing your workplace, we're here to help you guys. And so today we are going to spend a few minutes to start just going over a couple questions that we thought were interesting that we've recently been asked on our YouTube channel or just in various places that we get comments. And we're going to be walking through those for the first 15-ish minutes. And then for the rest of our time here, we're going to be answering any questions that you have. So feel free to get those ready. I do want to say, if you're watching from YouTube, if you have a more complex question that you want to maybe come on stage or unmute and talk to us, you're welcome to join the Teams meeting and we can bring you on that way. So let's see, anything else? We do this the first Wednesday of every month. So if this is your first time here, this is obviously not the first Wednesday. We had a scheduling hiccup, but typically we're here on the first Wednesday of every month. So thanks for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Mike.
Hey, everybody. So I'm going to go first with our first question that came in over the last month, and as it relates to custom forms and permissions. So if I'm in a SharePoint library or list and I create a custom form using Power Automate, the question was, sorry, did I say Power Automate? Yeah, Power App. And I customize the form. Who gets access? How do I control access to who can edit that form? So this is an interesting question, and I'm going to go a little bit into detail about some technical pieces of it to help people understand. A Power App that's created as a customized form is actually not stored in Power Apps. The actual, so if you go to Powerapps, make.powerapps.com, you're not going to see those listed there. And the reason is because they're actually stored within SharePoint, and Powerapps, the platform, is just being used to create and manage that. And as a result, the permissions for those apps is governed by SharePoint, which is where that resource is stored. So what that means is that how you manage the permissions to who can customize a form, who can modify a form, it's all based on the user's access to that list or library. So what I mean by that is, if I'm a regular user, so a visitor, which is the standard permission level that you would give maybe to someone, I have no access to edit things using the form. I only can use the form to view things, and I can't modify the form at all. If I'm a member, which is another common permission level or permission role within SharePoint, I'm going to have the ability to edit content using the form, view content using the form, but I'm not going to be able to edit the contents of the form. The permission level that is required to be able to modify it is edit list rights or library rights. So that would be like an owner, or if you created a custom permission level with the edit role or the edit permissions, those users would be able to come in and customize, either create a custom form or modify an existing custom form. So that's how that works. Mike, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, I'll take the next one. So I had a couple questions. One is kind of just generally, I think the question was, how do I redirect a user to a particular form in Power Apps or screen in Power Apps based on their group membership or maybe their role or position. And this is something I think we kind of reviewed at a pretty high level in previous office hours, but we'll go into a little bit more depth here in this example. So in my Power App, I have a very simple Power App setup. One thing to note is that I have created some security groups in Office 365. So I have a couple groups here that I've created. One is called sales, one is called delivery. These are just security groups. These could just as easily be Office 365 groups, even associated to a team if you wanted them to be. In the case of the sales group, I have simply added myself as a member. So if I go look at the list of members there, my user is listed there as a member. And then if we go take a quick look at what this Power App is doing to utilize that, we are actually using the Office 365 Groups connector in our Power App. So you'll see that here in our list of connections. We have a bunch of SharePoint connections, but then we also have this Office 365 Groups connection that we're using. And really simply, just to start things off, we're not doing anything right at the moment really in our OnStart. We're just setting our app name. But we do have, so there is a new concept here when we talk about like taking a user or navigating a user to a particular screen. It used to be probably about a month ago that you may have implemented this type of logic in your OnStart and then use the navigate command or method to take them to a particular screen based on, you know, whatever their role was. As it sits now, Microsoft no longer recommends using that navigate method or function inside of the OnStart, and so instead they've actually implemented something called a start screen. So in this particular case, we've identified our screen start as the actual screen that the application is going to start on. So if we take a look at that screen and the implementation that's going on there, the first thing that we do is, in this particular case, we're going to say our is sales member flag or our variable, we're going to set it to false. And that's the only thing that we're doing when the user comes to the screen. So we're basically resetting that. And then what we're simply doing here to determine the user's membership is we're basically, we have a timer set up. And if we look at that timer, we have something that we're doing when it starts. And specifically what we're doing is we're creating a collection here, a collection of our sales members, and we're making that call to that Office 365 Groups connector and saying, get our group members, and we're passing in the ID of that security group. So if you're wondering where you might get that ID of that security group, if you simply come out here and I've selected the sales security group, you can see that GUID is right here in the URL. And so that's probably the easiest way to grab it. And that's where I did grab it. And so we're basically getting that, putting it in a collection, and that's going to give me a list of any members that are in that group. And then I'm simply setting my is sales member to basically count the number of rows if I filter that collection with my user email address. And so if that's greater than 0, then I know I'm in that group, and so then I know I'm a sales member. Okay, so that's what's doing when the timer starts, and this timer in this case is running for about 5 seconds. And then when the timer ends, we are basically saying if is sales member is true, then we're going to take you to the sales screen. Otherwise, we're going to take you to the home screen. So that's really all that's going on here. So if we play this application, we'll see our sales membership got flagged to true because it went and made that check. And after about 5 seconds of the timer, it navigated me to the sales group screen. So that's a pretty simple example of how you might do that. Truly, there can be a lot of other scenarios out there. You might use a SharePoint security group, for example, and you can make an HTTP request to get membership in that group. But that Office 365 security group is a pretty easy example to set up. Matt, you want to do your next question or next one?
I can do mine. That's not a problem. So the other question that I got was related to groups versus teams. So as many of you may know, when you create a team, you get a group, but you can also create a group separate from a team. So Microsoft Office 365 enabled group, or enabled security group, I think is the official term. And the question was really related to there's differences between the two, and what do you recommend in how to create them? And so I guess I'm going to first go through, Mitch, you're sharing my screen, right? I'm going to go through a little bit about creating groups and the different ways that you can create groups, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we recommend. From a number of tools, Outlook, Planner, Stream, and there's a bunch of other ones, you can create groups. So in Outlook, you can click New Group, fill out some content, click OK, and you create a new Office 365 group, right? Same thing for a planner. So if you do a planner and you don't select Add to an existing group, it's going to create a brand new group based on this plan name, right? Like that's how that works. Same thing with Stream. If you come into Stream and you go Group, you're going to create a brand new group. And it's an Office 365 group. What that means is an Office 365 group includes things like a shared Outlook mailbox, a calendar, document libraries, planner, OneNote, notebook, like a bunch of resources that are available to it, right? But you won't get Teams chat with channels and all of the Teams experience, right? So if you create a team using the team app, so if I go in here and I select Teams, and I were to create a team here, it will also create a group, and that group will have some features, but there will be some features that are by default turned off. So again, if I come in here and I go to my teams and I scroll down and say, I want to create a new team, and I say, I want to create a new team, and I fill out some details, this is going to create a group, but it's also going to create a team. And in doing so, the primary thing that's different, this is the main thing that's different, the email mailbox is not enabled. You can't see it, okay? So that's what confuses a lot of people. It can really be very confusing because you can also create a team from an Office 365 group, in which case it would show up in email as an email-enabled group. But if you just create a team, it won't show up as an email-enabled group, which is where a lot of the confusion comes from, and is why I mentioned it and why I mention managing this appropriately. So let's talk about recommendations. So from my perspective, it really depends on how big your organization is and how much control you want to have. For a lot of organizations, randomly creating teams and groups is not really something you want to do. You want to have some sort of process around it. And so in those cases, I would recommend disabling the group creation. And the way you do that is configure it so that only certain users can create it, administrators as an example. And then basically having a process by which people can request that resource, and then you would create it. So that would be one way to handle it. The other would be basically just training, explaining to people this is the main difference, much like what I went through, this is the main difference in features is this email functionality, which the email functionality doesn't work just like a shared mailbox. It's similar, but not exactly the same, which is why Microsoft, when they launched Teams, after they launched Teams, changed it so that Teams by default don't have the email-enabled mailbox, because people get really confused by that, because Outlook is is one of their main tools that people use, and then seeing this extra group section can get really confusing to people. So training people on what those differences are and then letting them make the decision about what's the best way to create it. It doesn't really matter whether or not you create it from a planner, a group from a planner, or Outlook, or Stream, or even some of the other, SharePoint can create one. Like, it doesn't really matter which way you go about it. What really matters is whether or not you're creating a group or a team. That's the important piece. And the only way to create a team is to do it from the Teams app. Everything else just creates a group. So I think that covers that.
All right, on to the next question. So this one's a little bit more nuanced or complex. Basically, the question was, and we've kind of talked a lot about customized list forms in SharePoint and the behavior there. And this one in particular, someone noticed that when I basically create a custom list form using Powerapps, and the user is editing that form, the behavior is such that the user can actually click off of that panel or off of that form and lose any data that they forgot to save. So unless they click save, they don't get to save their data. And they noted that was different from the out-of-the-box behavior on the out-of-the-box SharePoint list form that basically auto-saves individual fields while you're editing it. And so we kind of want to walk through that a little bit and talk about the differences there and what options you might have to circumvent that. So in this particular case, I've got a few SharePoint lists open. This one in particular, this one has just the default behavior. So if we open up one of these items in my list, we'll see that we have the ability to come in here and we can actually edit these things individually if we want to. And as we make changes to these, so for example, if I make a change to this, and then I move on to another field, it will save that automatically. So it's saved that individually. And so let's quickly jump over to another list that has a customized list form and see what that looks like. So in this case, I'll open this particular item up, and there is no ability here to edit the individual fields and have them autosave. So right now I'm just viewing the form. The only option I have here is to choose to edit all. So that right away is a difference. But notably, what the user had said is, well, if I come in here and I change something, you can actually click off of here and lose that change, right? Nobody even knows that you changed it, and it didn't change in the list, and it's not actually changed. So what do we do? So I went and took a look at the out-of-the-box behavior and trying to kind of figure out what is different. And in reviewing that, I noticed that if I choose Edit All in this particular case, instead of just individually editing the fields, it opens up, again, the out-of-the-box form. But there's a difference here, and the difference is a couple things. One, at the bottom I have a save and a cancel button, so it's very evident that the way that Microsoft has designed this, they want you to click save or cancel to get out of this particular situation. So they've got those options both at the top in the default toolbar and then at the bottom in these buttons that have been added to the form. But then the other thing that I noticed is that when I flipped over to this view, so if I click cancel, if you just pay attention to the left side of my screen, right now I cannot actually click on it and get out of this form. And if I click cancel and go back into view mode, if you watch that left side of the screen, you'll actually watch that it became more into view or less, I would say, more transparent. And so what that is telling me is that they are doing something special with their version of the form, that when you go into edit mode, I think that they are putting basically a panel or a rectangle over the entirety of the screen so that you can't do anything in that other part of the screen. Now, above the form, I can click on the SharePoint link, or I can click on the waffle and do something else. I can go somewhere else, and I will lose my data if I made any changes. That's just the way that is. But I think they're at least covering up this part of the screen so that you cannot click here and do something else. So note that. So that would be an option you could implement on your form. There's probably not a whole lot of examples out there. I think this is something literally that I was just thinking about as I was thinking about this question today, and I kind of discovered that behavior difference. Some other things you might consider, and I think in our original answer we were like, hey, in the app object, if you're looking at the app object, you can turn on this confirm exit option, and this is really intended for Powerapps proper. It doesn't necessarily work all the way in customized list forms. If we go take a look at how that actually it does work here, if, for example, I choose to edit this item and I come in here and make a change, and I click out of here, now if I navigate somewhere else, I will actually get a browser prompt that says, hey, you've made some changes. These aren't going to be saved. And so that's what turning that option on will actually do for you. So again, it doesn't necessarily save your data or give the user the option to actually save it. It just tells you, hey, something changed, and you might want to not go where you're going. So the user would have to remember that and figure that out, and then actually come back here and choose to save that. So that's how that option works. Another option that I found online today that I thought was kind of interesting was, well, if you go onto your form in your edit mode, and in each of the individual data cards, if you select the field, you could do something like this in the on change. So depending on the type of field it was, this was an example for a text field. If we're in edit mode, then you could choose to go patch your data set with whatever the change to that field is whenever the user goes through the form. So if you're tabbing through the form, making changes, every change that they would make, it would go basically patch that and auto-save for them. But that's obviously not necessarily ideal either. I think the important thing to note there is that there is a distinction between the two, and you should be like thinking of those things. And if that is a concern, you might consider, like, can I use the out-of-the-box form? Is that good enough? Because you do have options here on the right-hand side to configure the layout and edit the columns and make some changes here without doing full-on Powerapps customized list forms. So just something to note there. And that's, I think, all I have. Cool. So if you have any questions out there, feel free to post them in the chat, or we can bring you on stage if you want to have a discussion about something in particular. And we are ready.
I'm not sure whether or not it's Hiba, but you should be able to come off mute, probably. There, I allowed your mic. You should be able to come off mute now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep, so it's Hiba. And I just recently found out about Bulb through just looking through YouTube videos. And so at my workplace, we're trying to automate our help desk ticketing system. and we're using email right now. So we have like this Microsoft Forms where the user will come in and submit their software, hardware requests, and it'll come through our mailbox.
Yep.
So just recently discovered about Powerapps and what it can do. But the thing is, we have a external help desk that actually does the whole hardware and software, like installing for the user.
Yep.
And they have their own system, their own ticketing system. So, but we're trying to have our own ticketing system so we can own the data instead of having to rely on them to extract the data and all of that. So my question is that if we have our own ticketing system using the Powerapps, is there a way to communicate? So the thing is, they use email as well for their ticketing system. So whenever a user sends an email to their help desk email address, automatically there's a ticket created in their system. And as the email chain progresses, their ticket also updates.
Yep.
So is that something that Powerapps can do also? So let's say if we have a ticket that's open that needs to go to our external help desk, is there a way as soon as a ticket is open and we know that it needs to go to this external help desk that an email can be shoot out to that help desk and they can just reply back via email and it can update the ticketing system?
Yeah, so first, welcome. Thanks for watching our stuff. So how big is your how many users is your organization?
Right now I'd say it's 200, 300, but we're growing.
Okay, 200, 300. So this is, I don't know that I can give you a 100% answer all the way. I would tell you that it can do a lot of what you're talking about. The tricky part is if they're generating and only communicating around the ticket using email, the integration between the two systems will be at best what we would call brittle, meaning so it's completely feasible to have a Power App or something that would consume content. So somebody would open a ticket, let's say, in that tool and fill out a bunch of data, and then let's say email someone on your team to say, okay, cool, I've got it. Oh, I can answer this one, or no, I need this external team to do it, and they could maybe click a button and it would send an email to their system, right, to say, hey, go ahead, go. We need a ticket. Here's the details we collected from the user. That's completely feasible. The tricky part is what happens after that, because at that moment in time, their ticketing system created a ticket and is going to send an email back probably about, hey, your ticket has been successfully opened, and it may include like a ticket number, and linking that all together so that any further communication that might happen works appropriately might be a challenge. Now, most ticketing systems have APIs in addition to like email integration, and so finding that out and maybe be able to use that other integration to be able to manage it would probably be something to consider, is what I would say. So that would be part of what I would say is like, yes, it seems completely feasible. It's also feasible that, you could manage the relay between the two systems to say, hey, this is, these users, we just got something back from your external third party, and I want to send that back to whoever is using the ticketing system on your side. It just can get kind of messy with the two systems. Two other points that I would raise is that if you haven't looked at it, with the size organization you have, you should be able to use what's called an organization-wide team. And if you use an organization-wide team, you could create that ticketing system in that team, and that team would allow you to use things like Dataverse, which would be a much better way than, let's say Sharepoint or another system to store the data for free. So the way Microsoft, from a licensing perspective, does that, I don't know if you're familiar with any of this, but Powerapps, if you have an Office 365 license, you have Powerapps, but only as it relates to other Office 365 products. If the moment you want to store the data in SQL, in Dataverse, in something else, or access these other things, they call them a premium connector, that requires additional licensing for every user that wants to use it. one carve out that they have made in the last year is that within a team, you can create a environment, which is a Dataverse thing. And then there's a bunch of apps, including if you go into Teams right now, you can actually create a team and have a template created that is like a help desk or ticketing system. And there's templates for those apps. And those all use Dataverse. And as long as you're doing that within a team, you may have the ability to kind of really jumpstart your development on something like what you're talking about. Obviously, it doesn't have any of the integrations with the, a third-party system or anything like that. But it may get you, start you moving in the right direction.
So, would SharePoint Lists be sufficient? I'm not familiar with
I was just going to kind of go down the route of if you wanted to do kind of the poor man's approach, so to speak. SharePoint could be sufficient on your end to track the data that you need to track. I do think that you might want something a little bit more robust, or you might need an additional list to track some of the interactions between the two systems. So for example, if you send a ticket over to the other system, to the external system, and then there's some chatter back and forth about what's going on, like it's been accepted, it's ready, we're sending over the pieces of equipment now, that type of stuff, you want to capture that chatter maybe in an additional SharePoint list. But you could certainly do that. And then I was going to say simply the thing, if you're truly just looking at sending emails over to do the integration and then maybe monitoring a shared mailbox when stuff comes back from that external vendor's system, so a tool like Power Automate would be sufficient for that, for both monitoring that shared mailbox and then also being the mechanism that sends that email to that other system. The key thing in doing that is to identify whatever the important pieces of data are and where they're going to be in those messages. So if there's a ticket number, where is it going to be? Like, can I expect it in the subject line? If there's a person who's responsible, are they also going to be in the subject line? Are they going to be in the to, or the from, or the CC? Like, where are all of those pieces of data that are going to tie that information together to a single ticket? So those will be the things that you need to work on. And then, as Matt said, even that may be kind of brittle, because if somebody doesn't always follow those rules that you've clearly defined, or if they change the email format or something like that, let's say that vendor system gets an upgrade, that could all just break.
Yeah. So the other thing I was going to say is it relates to the SharePoint versus Dataverse question. SharePoint is okay up into a point, right? SharePoint doesn't have so if you say, hey, all these tickets are available. It's cool if everybody in the organization can view all of these things. It's not okay if they edit them, and I only want a couple people to edit them. That's okay. That'll work. If you say every ticket should only be viewable by the person that creates it, yes, there are ways to support that, but it gets really complicated if you want to support models like, I'm going to request on behalf of someone else. Like, I'm a manager and I'm requesting on behalf of someone else. Item level managing, if you end up going down a path that requires what's called item level permissions, it gets really messy really quick. The second area is the volume, right? If you guys have 50,000 requests a year, which, with the size of organization, probably not. But if you have a large volume, it gets really, really difficult to manage all of that in SharePoint. It's not really designed for that level of manipulation in real time, right? If you're talking about, 10 requests a week kind of thing, it's probably not that big of a deal. You probably can do it in SharePoint. Like I said, as long as your security things aren't a huge deal, you'll probably be just fine. But if you have those other needs or potential for those other needs, using something like Dataverse is going to be a much better, more robust approach going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Not a problem.
Really good question.
Anybody else? I think we've only got 2 other people on the call right now, or one other person on the call, so.
Okay, then if that's the case, can I continue with more questions?
You're more than welcome
Absolutely.
to.
Okay, so you mentioned about having data in a certain, so would it be like a template we would have to place in? Because our main point is that this help desk does not want to work in another system.
Yeah, their help desk team doesn't want to work in another system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so say the first part of your question again.
Would it be like like an email template? Like this is where the subject line will be. This will be the ticket number because we don't. We're not really worried about having their ticket number. We're just
Okay.
worried about them actually updating our ticketing system
Okay, got it.
appropriately.
So, so two things. In order to do that, I need to know what ticket they generated. So that's the first thing to think about. Like your team may not care what ticket number it is in the other system, but in order for us to update, like you guys, to update your ticketing system based on an email that you get from their system, you need to know what they're talking about, right? And you need some key, some way to do that.
Yeah, so you might generate like a request ID or something like that out of your system. And when you send that over, stick that in the subject line and then set an expectation with them that that request ID is in all correspondence in the subject line so that you could pick it out.
So I'm gonna Mitch, if you're showing screens, don't show it yet. I'm not quite ready.
I just showed it because I thought you were prompting me.
I'm not quite ready. 1 second. I need to make sure I'm in a spot that is safe to display because we're going rogue at the moment. Okay.
But I was just going to chime in. I think we should just remind that if there is an API and a connector to use that.
That's
first,
a better way.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can share my screen now. So basically, I was just going to do a little workflow diagram here. So, if in the app, you create a ticket, right? Like if that's what you're going to do, that next thing is really going to be, here, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. So this thing right here would be like email. So like this would be, let's say it's your system. So let me, here, nope. Where is the color? There we go. So let's say that this is your system, and let's say that this is your vendor system, right? So you're going to create a user's going to enter a bunch of data, and you're going to create the ticket, and then once they create the ticket, we're going to email their system to create a ticket, right? That's what's going to happen. And then what's really going to happen next is they're going to email your shared mailbox. So this will be you guys with your the details of this ticket, right? And so what's really important, as you were kind of alluding to, is the format of this email. So yes, this would be like a template. You would say, we're going to request like who requested it, the details of it, maybe the system, maybe like whatever details you want to capture. So you're going to capture all that data, and then you're going to have a system, a standard format here that's going to send out an email. So in your system, you go, okay, cool. I created the ticket. I'm going to email them. This is my format, which so on the first line is maybe the words requested by with who requested it, and maybe description with description. You're going to format that email appropriately. Then when you get the email back from their system, what's important there is to say, hey, I got this message back, and maybe the subject is the same as what I sent them. So maybe in your subject you include like the number from your ticketing system, right? And then basically you would go back and say, maybe the next piece in this process would be to update the ticket, right? So basically update it with maybe the ticket number, that it was the date it was received by them, like whatever that might be, right? And then from here, you're basically going to say, I don't know what the next step is, whether or not it's a user responding, or maybe it's them saying, hey, we got it, we fixed the problem, or we sent the thing, right? If it's them, it's going to be another email to the shared mailbox, and then you're going to update that ticket, which will maybe generate some other workflow. If it's the other way around, where the user goes in and says, hey, wait a minute, this still isn't working, maybe they're saying, hey, there's another problem, you're going to need to then update the ticket and then send it back to their system again. So that's the type of thing you're going to be doing. Again, if you can at all get around doing email, that would be ideal, because email is just a big blob of text, and if anything changes, like what I said originally, it makes it very brittle. So any changes at all in format or technology can have a knock-on effect on this process.
Or if you're allowing the users to put a description
Yeah,
of
themselves,
the
and then
issue in
you're
there,
using
and then they put keywords in there that you're looking
that
for,
you're looking for. Yeah,
then it kind of can blow up your scenario.
yeah. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Oh, that does make sense. Yeah. No, thank you so much. And another thing is, so Power BI.
Yep.
So that would be something it can pull in real time, like because we're also planning to have like a list for our hardware. So we're trying to have like a ticketing system that also manages the hardware list. So like the Power BI can pull all of that and show real time available laptops.
So real time is a question. SharePoint integration with Power BI doesn't work real time, like truly real time.
Okay.
It does a update on a scheduled basis. That update can happen very frequently, like every 30 minutes, I think, or 15. But it's not like if you really mean real time, like at this second, I know what, like I want to see the data that is there. You want to use something like Dataverse or SQL or some other technology that's a highly available, transactional database. SharePoint's data storage is built on those technologies, but they're not meant as that type of technology.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Cool.
I'll leave you guys alone now.
That's all right.
No, we appreciate.
That's what we're here for.
So do you guys like work with companies to help like automate like
Yeah,
processes,
We do,
for
yeah.
sure. Yep.
like building apps? Okay.
So we do work with customers to understand what their vision is for modern workplace, and so modern workplace includes like automation, collaboration, communication, and through that work we identify either things that we can help them do, so that they would be the people doing it, or all the way up to we do the work for them, right? We gather requirements with them, understand their needs, and then go execute the custom application workflow. In some cases it's SharePoint content. If it's a communication thing, it might be an intranet. So we do all of those things. Yep.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I came across you guys.
Yeah, we're glad too.
Thank you.
Cool.
Anybody else out there in the digital landscape that has a question, post it now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's mostly YouTube at this point.
Yeah, I think we can call it. Thanks everyone that joined us, and we'll see you again next time.
Cool.